Рад всех приветствовать.
A pleasure to welcome you all. I
Э,
see more people are coming. Good.
Я старший специалист
Name is Konstantin Polishin.
Technologies.
I'm a chief expert at the pen testing team at Positive Technologies.
DevTalks.
And some of you may remember me
Смотрел запись.
because I made a presentation at Standoff Talks.
Круто.
And I know that the recording of this presentation has scored over 8,000 views.
В момент начнут тараторить. За это извиняюсь.
I have a very dense presentation. I will have to speak very fast. I'm sorry about that. In this presentation, I'll be talking about the trends and
Актуальные способы доставки
stats of our projects.
получения начального
We'll also be talking about various ways of gaining entrance, of doing initial access, and while phishing with attachments is bad style already.
и
Also, I'll be talking about stealing credentials and various vectors for bypassing two-factor authentication, kill chains in the wild, and also we'll be talking about ways of increasing the efficiency of your kill chain.
причин. В нашем комьюнити укоренилось восприятие социальной инженерии как нечто гуманитарное.
In our community, there is this notion that social engineering is an artsy kind of sort of liberal arts kind of thing. It's not a technical endeavor.
Это
However, spear phishing
и симбиоза разноплановых технических
is in fact a symbiotic area where you can combine various payloads with various initial access techniques. It's you can hardly do it if you have done nothing but reading Mr. Mitnick's books.
такое сообщение, которое вы можете видеть,
I got this personal message I'm showing in the slide.
получить, потому что человек не знал, что я отвечаю за экспертизу.
Apparently, the person who sent me this message didn't really know what I am responsible for. Like, he was wondering why, a company like ours would be interested in social engineering, because, he says that in order to send letters, you don't really need
Глобально это
any technical skills.
это создать конкуренцию на рынке социалки, то есть с помощью посредством шеринга экспертизы, и побудить вендоров.
Well, I'm doing this presentation because I want to motivate vendors of cybersecurity tools, particularly vendors of, mail solutions, to be more serious about Sandbox and about their products in general.
Начнем с немного занудного, с статистики, чтобы понимать
Let me start with a slightly boring stats that should show where this industry is evolving.
социалкой пентестовую, условно, проверка осведомленности, и социалка...
Social engineering in pen testing versus red team social engineering is actually quite stark.
И критерии, чем
For red team social engineering, you actually need different criteria.
при проверке осведомленности обычный пентест SE
When you're doing nothing but awareness testing, for example, you will be using such conditions as domain whitelisting
компании, что
and, response to the payload or a response to the payload by this or that ampli and testing for whether files get opened or not. When we are red team, we don't get to see all that, but we
статистика,
do get to be more creative as we do our pen testing.
когда мы пробиваемся просто с внешки,
So different types of red team social engineering include spear phishing, internal phishing,
и
plus vishing on Telegram, for example, smishing on Telegram.
удобней.
But, Telegram here could be replaced with any other messenger of your choice.
Количественная метрика — это, естественно, доставленные письма пользователя.
Well, the key metric we care about is the number of emails delivered containing a payload.
Которые использовались для разведки.
And this, an important thing to mention here is that we are not taking into account the number of letters that were delivered, but, were used for reconnaissance purposes.
И
And we're also not taking into account social engineering letters designed to
отсюда
deflect the attention of SOC employees.
переходы по ссылкам.
What I'm also not showing here is a number of link click-throughs and responses to emails, because they have fun, for sure,
отладочный импакт как для нас, как для атакующих, что мы
But
понимаем,
I do think that they matter much more for, say, debugging purposes.
прислать скриншоты, у нас вот это не запустилось, вот это не запустилось, и мы понимаем, что нам нужно доработать.
Well, because we do need to do our debugging as well. So these are the figures.
При спирфишинге
And at the top, we have letters, calls, credentials,
рассылать,
and final one is conversion.
то есть не делать internal phishing.
So naturally, we want to get the creds, the credentials.
Момент, что при использовании вишинга, то есть голосового воздействия,
And when we're using phishing, which is, voice phishing,
возрастает. И еще один
you do see that it results in much higher conversion.
фишинг, ну или мне проще называть это
Also note how popular smishing or social media phishing is.
в разных компаниях по-разному устроен процесс. Кто-то очень,
This process will differ from company to company.
а Telegram, он
You know,
в телефоне.
in some companies, people don't use email that much, but they will be using, say, Telegram every minute.
Это то, что
So what are the key trends we're seeing here? One is that the number of regular projects is actually going down.
интересно получить наглядный
Well,
результат.
because our clients want to see how SE works.
60% всех
They don't really care about statistics, whether, they're 60% protected, 70% protected means very little to them.
по социальной инженерии это демонстрация получения
So
начального
we have this new type of projects for our clients. Well, we demonstrate how we can use social engineering to get initial access.
достижения, как мы будем показывать получение начального доступа. Ретим тенденция это то, что
And the red team trend
таргетированность рассылки сценариев, даже общих,
is that, scenarios are getting more targeted.
что мы попадемся. Это более тщательное формирование изучения фокус-группы, то есть
And we tend to
технических специалистов,
develop and study our focus groups in a better way, in a more diligent way. We try to identify more vulnerable groups of employees.
сэндбокс, какой сэндбокс, что он
We do more complex preparation before we start our SE campaign, what kind of sandbox is being used, and we will be using smishing and vishing.
и влияние SE на общий результат ретима.
And we're also seeing the increased role that SE is starting to play for the red teams.
Затрагивал уже тему социалки.
At standoff talks, I've already talked about social engineering. I've mentioned that we do have some very advanced clients
И почтовых, и в таком
who
контексте
do have a lot of defenses under their hood, so to speak.
attachmentом неэффективно.
And if this is the case, it makes very little sense to send your payload with attachments. Well, because A, such clients will have content filters. It could be done at the Exchange server level or elsewhere.
Файлы с опасными расширениями, то есть мы отправим какой-нибудь LNK, HTML,
So if you send LMK, HTML, or JS, or some archive as an attachment, this mail will be bounced. It's not a global issue. There will still be lots of corporations that do not have those settings.
доставляем письмо,
And, some of them may have blacklists.
возможно, нас спалят статики,
Even if it's not bounced back, there may be a false positive, there may be an AVS in place. And if you're using a mature payload, you can still get through. Sandbox will be a more significant threat, however, more significant challenge.
надеюсь, что мы
Well, if your payload does come with some evasion techniques in tow, so to speak, you can still get through.
является
Another trend
арсенала в связи с тем, что снижается
is the change in the phishing arsenal. Because phishing with the elements of with macroses of Microsoft Office is getting significantly less effective. You will remember that in October 2021, Microsoft started switching off some of Excel 4.0 macroses. In February 22, they started blocking VBA macroses. In March 23, Microsoft announced they were starting to block interaction with 120 dangerous extensions.
используемых офисных документов.
And therefore, the number of Office documents containing macroses and being used
И
in projects or in the wild has been going down.
контейнеры и LNK файл.
Instead, we are seeing growth in the number of containers and LNK files being used. And I'm talking about keyboards and Emotet and Bumblebee containers on the rise.
Период в контейнерах продолжают доставлять офисные документы.
Office documents are still being delivered in containers, maybe because of threat actors still loved MS Office, but starting from October 2021, transition to LNK files has been on the rise, and the rise is quite impressive.
OneNote тренд, то есть в декабре 22 было около 6 фишинговых кампаний.
Well, OneNote was another major trend. Like in December 2022, there were 6 phishing campaigns using OneNote files, while in January 2023, we're observing 40 campaigns.
Microsoft объявили, что они начнут блокировать.
And it was after that that Microsoft announced they were going to start blocking dangerous extensions. So you can see an example here with Emotet.
Что нужно
So you can build a VBS script or whatever in a OneNote file, and then you cover it up with a button or an icon so that the user clicks it. Obviously, it's no real button. There are lots and lots of files there to make sure that you don't miss the right button, so to speak. Technically speaking, it's nothing new, really.
Оля,
They build in new objects with the OLE technology. It's very similar to what we did back in Microsoft Word 2016, but with the migration to MS Word 2019, where OLE objects were blocked by default.
эта лавочка прикрылась. Что и произойдет с ваннотами?
This attack surface was gone, and the same is going to happen to OneNote very soon.
Хорошо, но в контексте России
OneNote is all very well, but in fact, in Russia, they're not that useful.
в качестве пользователя
Well, because that requires that the host machine is running OneNote,
раскатан на хосте.
and that doesn't happen very often in Russia.
Необходимо использовать облачный
If there is no OneNote there, you will need to rely on the cloud infrastructure of MS Office
Ну и в принципе это слабое
in order to execute the payload.
знакомство пользователей с
And that doesn't happen in Russia in 2023 for obvious reasons, I guess.
писем, содержать
One of the trends we're seeing here is the reduced number of letters containing attachments with payload.
и миграция
Actually, we're seeing a reduction in attachments generally.
о
However, at the same time, LNK files are on the rise. Now let's talk about delivery and storage payload.
все понимают, что таких способа по сути два. Это attachment,
There are 2 ways of doing it: attachment and links. And attachments are no good anymore, so links are the name of the game, and they will remain the name of the game going forward.
шлюзы, песочницы, которые
They are able to bypass the sandbox and mail gateway protection systems if they do not know how to dynamically analyze the links.
зарубежных продуктов, она вот подброшена
Now,
и
as
пользуется продуктами, которые остаются на
foreign vendors have left the Russian market, the baton, so to speak, has been snatched by the Russian service providers, and the way they do dynamic analysis of links
есть контейнер,
is subpar, let's put it like this.
контейнер в гетом, курлом скачивается HTML
So,
содержимое.
you know, they're doing URL or VGET in order to download the content of the link, and then this HTML content goes to be analyzed by the YARL rule.
Формочка для перехода учетных данных. Безопасно?
And well, it may discover something like a template for collecting, say, personal data. But that could possibly be not the end of the story. There may be something else behind it.
Понимать, что
That won't be seen by Russian systems at the moment. Also, please remember that link analysis is pretty complex.
однозначно не могли порой
Even international sandbox systems often found it difficult to pass the right verdict.
страницы, что там будет происходить. Но
You know, it's pretty difficult indeed to identify the real intent of the target page. So, good sandboxes would enter some test data and would discover, for example, it was a phishing form, and they would, for example, click some buttons, and they would possibly, say, parse password pages,
какие
and they would do other
проблемы
proper
и
things.
риски? В связи с тем,
What are the issues and risks we are seeing here?
от одних продуктов к продуктам, которые
Well, now that we have a new suite of products taking up responsibility for defenses, is such that, you know,
тестовые учетные данные
it is difficult now to do still credentials over phishing vectors.
сотрудникам.
test data is being entered, therefore phishing forms are not being detected, there is no dynamic imitation of user actions.
Или с облака не
Like the sandboxes Russian systems are using, will not be pressing buttons, quote unquote.
Песочница просто качает HTML-файл,
So
анализирует
the sandbox will simply download an HTML file,
и проблема
and therefore it may fail to discover anything malicious there. Moreover, there is an issue with obfuscated HTML content,
у браузера не
which means that there may be difficulties identifying attacks based on JS with
Тут важно понимать, что при сохранении
large-scale obfuscation.
текущей технологической тенденции
If the current technological trend stays strong, well, there will be increased risks in phishing attacks going forward.
на защиты корпоративной почты там делают почту на N% безопасней, на N% меньше вредоносов.
So if you're hearing that this or that system for protecting corporate email gives you whatever improvement in your protection,
HTML
take it with a grain of salt.
ранее прозвучал термин
HTML smuggling has already been mentioned,
скрытой доставки,
and HTML smuggling is a technique for
в которой используется
clandestine delivery of payload requiring legitimate functions of HTML5 and JavaScript.
кода,
In
закодирован
many cases, it will be using code delivery obfuscation techniques. So
пользователь взаимодействует с таким файлом и
a kind of surgent HTML file is delivered, and then the browser of the victim decodes the data,
извлекает полезные
and a blob object will
то есть в обход
execute the payload on the host machine, bypassing
APS,
the perimeter protections,
прокси корпоративные, сети
such as the proxies or IDS or IPS or network traffic analyzers,
JavaScript код.
because all they will see is legitimate JavaScript and HTML code.
Банально
What are the potential
на HTML файл
varieties of HTML smuggling? Well, obviously, you can deliver an HTML file in a container, be it zip or ISO.
кого-то пробивают, где нет контент-фильтра. Плюсы
So if you're not using a content filter,
русская дропнет
this in all probability will be successful.
не вижу, потому что здесь из минусов это очень ужасная
The
оперативная
downside here is that OPSEC is horrible,
на анализ,
and this way your payload will be analyzed by the existing
проблема именно то, что
cryptographic and other protection tools.
получить этот файл
It may easily be thwarted by a mail content filter, and it does require additional actions on the victim side.
которым является
What, in my opinion, is a more effective vector is a link with a web page with the HTML smuggling techniques.
динамический статистический
The advantage is that there is no dynamic or static analysis done by the defenses, and all it requires of the victim is
учетные данные, потом идет
just some interaction with the payload you dropped.
происходит.
And the victim usually believes they know what's happening.
Естественно, не успею покрыть. Тут
I won't be able to cover all the nuances of HTML smuggling, but these are some useful links for you to study if you're interested. Take, for example, Block Deliver.
новые современные техники офускации.
The second link talks about new, shall I say, modern obfuscation techniques.
И почитать. Не останавливайся. Еще одним способом, техникой доставки и
Another technique for delivering payload and storing payload is obviously the cloud services. I'm talking about Google Disk or Yandex Disk or Dropbox
загружаем, получаем.
or Mail.ru services.
Таким, например, промышляет АПТ-группировка Old Gremlin, русскоязычно работающая.
Now, for example, Old Gremlin, which is a Russian-speaking APT attacking Russian-speaking companies, does this a lot.
Больше какое-то доверие пользователей к знакомым сервисам.
Now, these malicious cloud services have the following advantages. Users tend to put a lot of trust in Yandex, Google, and Mail.
Например, при проведении red проекта
Secondly, when you're doing red team projects, for example, if we register a new phishing domain, SOC can easily detect it using brand monitoring or what have you, and they will block it, or when a phishing attack starts happening, they will de-delegate it very quickly. So if we're using our own domain, they will easily block it. But if we're using, say, Yandex or mail services, well, they get no way of delegating it, though. Obviously, they can still block it.
Нагрузку проверили, что там нет никаких детектов, залили в облако, погнали. Извините,
So it's pretty easy to check, if they are going to block it or not based on IP alone.
каким-нибудь облачным антивирусом, если сервис
Well, the disadvantage is that
активное удаление файлов
up security-wise, it's not ideal.
сок детектирован,
When a phishing attack is happening, it will be detected and removed by SOC. So we will be sending out emails, for example. And if a user got the letter, it has been automatically marked by the existing systems, may have even been deleted by the user.
очень приятно, когда
What's bad is that the user will actually get to see the files
и хранение нагрузки это
of the payload, I mean.
процентуально это сводится к
Well,
использованию
next one is WebDAV.
выполнению консольных
It's all about using console commands.
из экзотики в недавнем сэмпле распространителя SID
In a recent sample, we saw attachments, URL attachments. So the victim clicks the URL, gets a BET file, which then gets executed and performs a bunch of console commands that will execute remote code.
execution техникой, которой можно
The more effective
является
technique is WebDAV-based user execution via LNK files.
mounting
So we're using NetUse here to mount a network drive and then
промышляет Old Gremlin.
execute remote payload. And this is what old Gremlin does. They will often use
Mounted disk.
Dropbox-based files. If they cannot mount a network drive,
Естественно, ее никто не проанализирует в случае чего.
then the whole thing will not happen.
Но у нас веб-клиент, он отключен от стандартного.
So you may be thinking, okay, our
Но
web client is switched off, so WebDAV client will not work. However, if you use NetUse or push commands,
я не могу стартануть.
that will be bypassed, as I'm showing right here.
Пуш, диск успешно
So
стартоваться.
I can be using NetUse or push
Клиент
to do exactly that.
плюсы и минусы. Из плюсов это то, что
What are the advantages and disadvantages here? The advantage is that SVC host exa is the only process that will be fired up. The second one is that
придумывать
you don't really need to invent anything extra. You can rely on an extended set of HTTP commands. There is also automated
критерий при работах. Недостаточно возможно
proxy discovery and authentication.
файлов
On the con site,
и выполнение команд. Там появится код,
the mounting of network drives and code execution can take long.
локально в кэш клиенту веб.
Moreover, a payload will be copied locally, so if you have correlation rules, if you have EDR running, this SOC on the client side can be triggered. What are the trends that we're seeing? Well, there is a low efficiency of resisting link vectors. HTML smuggling is a powerful technique for delivering payload bypassing defenses, and WebDAV is also on the rise.
По ним доставляем. Поговорим о
So we've just discussed what we're delivering. Now let's discuss what is most effective and what's most efficient to deliver. Well, since our kill chain consists of at least two components, one is a payload, but also some user execution technique, we need to deliver both
пользователей без всяких
in a manner that will not
каких-то плашечек.
make the user suspicious.
Там для этого можно и нужно использовать
That, in my opinion,
разных типов RAR.
will require using archives of different types. So it could be RAR, 7Z, ZIP, TAR, gzip.
Просто так,
I am actually highlighting zip here for a very good reason.
возможно, не будет предустановлен как,
Users on their hosts
например, 7zip.
may fail to have
Нашли
additional unarchivers like 7Z.
анализа песочницы, когда там тоже не был предустановлен.
Like, for example, we found a sandbox that didn't have 7Z.
Говорили, а что делать-то? Как
Users would get attachments with 7Z. They would get in touch with the sysadmins, asking what they would do with that.
доставщики? Они еще служат
So containers can be used to deliver, but also they are good for
про
dodging
вариацию Zero Day
detection.
Zero Day вариацию
So you may have heard
zip, когда
of this variation of bypassing market swap via zip, where you're,
правильной зоны ID. В случае, если упакованным файлом в zip
let me put it differently. So if we package the file with zip and we show it as read-only, and Windows will try to unarchive it, but would fail to unarchive it, but would say it's read-only, so it would
в контейнерах
sort of mark it as legit.
bypass CVE запатчили одновременно с ней.
Naturally, this bypass was patched as part of these two CVEs.
Понятно, потому что эта проблема тянется еще с Windows 8.
In fact, this problem dates back to Windows 8. It has been publicly known since 2020, so I wonder why they call it CVE 2022. So this data stream is a function of NTFS, and this means that for FAT32 and UDF and other file systems, it would not be applicable. So containers would be marked up, but not the content of the containers.
Находиться снова и снова. Например, вот недавний
And I think that we will find new techniques for bypassing MOTW.
на основе ошибки проверки цифровой подписи.
So there was, for example, this recent smart screen bypass technique, which has obviously been patched since then. Please note that the same error can be triggered in so many different ways.
Если Nmap это швейцарский нож пентестера, то
Now, Nmap is a Swiss knife of a pen tester, while LNK files are a Swiss knife of a social engineer.
зависит от контекста использования, так как я чаще всего
Classification of LNK files really depends on your needs. I'm using LNK primarily for user execution, and this is what I also see in the wild as well.
файла, который запускает нагрузку, которую мы доставили в архиве, то есть все LNK находится в одном архиве с нагрузкой.
So what we see quite often is that LNK sits in the same archive with, say, user execution technique.
Это уже
But in fact, it's a very versatile tool.
execution dropper, когда LNK
So
выступает в
another
качестве
technique is user execution dropper, where LNK will be used in order to deliver some remote payloads. Could be MSI or WebDAV,
LNK или других
or it could be embedded XALNK, or it could be some other way of embedding scripts into LNK. So LNK is fired, then it creates a folder.
например,
But there is also shortcut qualification where you can
ярлыки, браузерные ярлыки,
shortcut modification. I'm sorry.
дописать
Where you can do, say, browser
пользователь будет запускать браузер уже с предустановленными
kind of labels,
которые мы принесли.
and then users will be launching shortcuts, browser shortcuts that will be running with some additional operands of ours.
Является чем-то прям таким новым.
Usage of LNK files is not dramatically new. In fact, numerous APTs
LNK файлы.
for over 7 years have been using LNK
Мы
files.
можем рассчитывать на
If we're using LNK files, we can count on a single launch.
нашей логике нагрузки. Плашка, которая приветствует пользователя в LNK, полученном в интернете, не является чем-то угрожающим и является недостаточной мерой противодействия.
This warning window is something users are used to, and therefore they are not really worried when they see it.
Любой
And naturally, you can do PDF files or docx files or any, even binaries if you know where they're located, to, use as camouflage for your links.
из лаборатории Касперского.
Well, take for example Magic APT, which is currently being researched by Kaspersky Labs. So here you see that there is an archive, with a single remote dropper of MSI. So LNK here, in my opinion, is used here as a user execution dropper technique. So LNK tries to launch and deliver some remote payload, which is MSI, obviously, and MSI in its own way is a dropper as well, and it will then trigger the real payload.
Бэкдора, коллеги,
Well, I'm not here to talk about the backdoor itself, and I think that will be covered by Kaspersky people. What I'm interested in is the actual infection chain.
оперативная безопасность, потому что если
Note that this chain has a high level of operational security coupled with high efficiency.
то, что возможно логичное завершение,
So it's a dropper behind a dropper.
можем упаковать что угодно. Этот пример выбран
Note that you can package pretty much anything into MSI. Now we are going to talk more about MSI soon. MSI, after all, is a very versatile container for threat actors, and you can package pretty much anything you like there.
15 листков материала, естественно, я это не успею рассказать. Я буду сейчас...
I had so much shell about MSI, and I don't have the time, so I will have to simplify it. There is a great study by Mariusz Banek, I'm sorry if I mangle his name, which describes how you use it, how you compile it. I absolutely recommend. It's a very good read. So, as attackers, we're interested in standard action and custom action. We're interested in particular in such attributes as set directory. That's effectively the directory where you're going to drop your files, but also we're interested in things like drop files and fail installation. What's interesting about this attribute is that it allows you to launch files with hanging processes and then remove the files off the disk. On the custom side, we'll be interested in exo command because it's the one responsible for launching commands and BS commands. So, for example, if a user has rights, admin rights, then we can launch our MSI and drop the payload and then run it with system rights. Also, we're interested in VBS and JS script rights. We can first test if the system is good for these scripts, and since MSI has great potential in terms of managing the extraction logic, we can actually stop the execution and delete everything, which means that we have packaging and storage of MSI files in different ways, and also extraction of files to the folder that we need, and also arbitrary code execution. So Mariusz, in his paper, covered file packaging in MSI using binary tables. This is not a very effective method because the files you've packaged into MSI will be running out of a temporary TMP file. But imagine that you need to launch something differently or you need to reposition it. That's not convenient. So I want to build on what Mariusz said. So our team discovered this very easy to find function of drop files. So when you package a file into a binary table, you will be using the regular base64 encoding. And then, all this is decoded for launch, for execution. Now, what I care about is that all these files can actually be packaged into a subcontainer. And then the files that we've packaged can actually be turned into proper holistic files sitting in the directory that we need, and then we'll be able to launch them with the exact comment attributes custom action. So we set a directory, we feed it the list of files for packaging. We can also add some meta information about MSI, and then we can use LNK to gain persistence. Moreover, UI bundles can be created. Now, what's good about that is that if we have a scenario for, say, updating some software, then we should be able to create an OI bundle and link it to MSI we've already created, and then feed it to the user. And that will create the interface that, they are used to seeing. What are the trends we're seeing here? A lot of attention is given to OPSEC, but nobody really wants to give their payload just like that. If it cannot be executed on the host, then it shouldn't be delivered at all. Moreover, containerization of payload. And there is great potential behind MSI files right now. Now let's talk about the vectors of stale credentials. Mr. Dogs has found two very interesting things. So the first concept here is browser attacks. So Mr. Dogs asked himself, if we could possibly do the checks of URL addresses less effective, because now they're even teaching kids at school that checking the URL is a good idea. So this is a browser in the browser platform, and you can see here that you enter the creds in the link, and then these creds are intercepted. And then some additional logic gets executed. The slide says I've just scanned the mammoth. So you can design a form like this. Then you clone it, you remove the extra fields, all you keep there is this simple window, but then you also add with the JS your arbitrary code. I don't really see that is going to have much of impact for the attackers, because these pop-up windows are not very common in corporations. I don't think many people saw this in corporate systems. This is stuff you get to see on Google primarily. Well, we do see quite a varied landscape of call functions, and yes, you can certainly do obfuscation on top of that. What's more interesting is the browser in the middle attack in order to bypass two-factor authentication. Numerous browsers, numerous resources are trying to thwart the classic DITM and man-in-the-browser attacks. And, that's a natural race. So there are new concepts developed to bypass two-factor authentication and other defenses. What does it look like? Obviously, we want to get between the browser and the user and get access to a particular asset. So we feed the link to our own servers, and the victim user launches a kiosk browser. How does it work? Well, just like cloud services, will give you a GUI to manage your VM over a VNC. So the architecture here is a Unix-based virtual machine. So you have an up-and-running VNC server, and there is also some TeamViewer or Google Chrome desktop or whatever works for you, and then a kiosk mode browser. So the way it works is like this: you get a link, you follow the link, and it starts a browser, at least that's what you think. Well, in fact, it's a kiosk browser running off a virtual machine. Then you enter your credits. Had I entered the right credentials, I would have been told, I would have been served a two-factor authentication. Well, since it's our server, we can run anything we want there, including man-in-the-browser attack. We can do some additional extensions, for example. But on the more passive side, we can do key logging, or we can export profiles, or we can simply have access to the active session. Now, in terms of OPSEC, this technique is horrible because we do give access to our own servers, which means that logging itself should be happening elsewhere, right? Because there is a risk of kiosk bypass. And since this is the case, we need to launch the browser in a restricted user mode. There are also some architectural issues around the exchange buffer. So, for example, if the user has got a very difficult password, which he tends to copy from KeePass, it won't work there. And there are also some other graphic issues. There is also static URL issue. Moreover, this kind of attack is currently unavailable for mobile devices. But we can combine browser in the middle with man-in-the-browser attack, and this way
приукрасить. Например, убрал
You can downplay some of these disadvantages.
функционалки для каждого сервиса.
So you won't need to do extra work for the functional logic, so to speak. You can also downplay the issues around static URL and GUI.
Какие тут тенденции? Это то, что классический фишинг все так же важен и эффективен, то есть мы получаем пробив.
Now, classic phishing is still important. It's still effective.
Например, если есть
If we have the credentials,
сервера сертификации, собрать шаблоны, посмотреть уязвимые, если есть...
we can quickly collect the templates, collect the names, and then we can do the last move.
Прогресс фишинговых техник.
Front-end progress gives rise to progress of phishing techniques, and we're seeing now new powerful ways of bypassing two-factor authentication. Kill chains in the wilds. Now I'm showing here two kill chains, which are like, philosophically speaking, and I also believe they are quite effective. The first one I've already described. That's the one being used by Blackmagic APT.
Эксплуатабельный на всех Windows.
And that's the one that relies on LNK files. It sort of guarantees that the commands that you need will be executed, and if the system is not equipped with everything it needs, then the payload will not be delivered, which is good because your payload will not get analyzed by the SOC. The second one is a combination of various TTPs used by various APTs, where, for example, you're using PDF files with links, taking you to Dropbox or Google Disk or WordPress, where you have HTML smuggling running, and it will drop a container such as an ISO file, and this ISO file will contain some difficult to see, some obfuscated elements, for example, link files. And, this is where the payload will be executed. For example, a binary file
Adobe с цифровой подписью и реализует логику
will be executed masquerading as Adobe file, having the digital signature of Adobe.
эффективность своего kill
How do you escalate the effectiveness of your kill chain?
в 2023 году.
Or, in other words, spoofing in 2023.
Шлюзах
So we can use
забыли о том, что возможен спуфинг корпоративного
various foreign solutions, and some of Russian customers have completely forgotten about mail domain spoofing.
что
Interestingly enough, now that international vendors have left the Russian market, it became clear that current spoofing protection measures are not up to scratch. So in this particular project, we discovered some signs of spoofing, and we decided to learn more about it
и написать
because we wanted to come up with more up-to-date anti-spoofing recommendations, and we also wanted to come up with a set of recommendations for CM systems for those who are not equipped to detect spoofing at the mail gateway level.
кому можно бесплатную проверку спуфинга.
Now, I invited all our clients to check their systems for spoofing proofness at the beginning of this year. Very few companies were interested, surprisingly. But, this is another call.
Важный факт.
All right, one more thing I should mention. We have identified 4 variations of spoofing.
Активного домена и одна вариация
3 included spoofing of the main corporate domain.
доменов организаций там каких-нибудь, легитимных.
And, was one case of a legitimate subdomain.
Усилить свой kill chain, то есть, например, рассылать
Obviously, there are various ways of strengthening your kill chain.
почту Вову мы можем
For example, if you can use the corporate mail, that's better. You can, for example, learn who this particular user is corresponding with, like who he seems to have the trust of, and then, do spear phishing.
Они будут стрелять от проекта к проекту. Я очень не люблю
This is not the kind of information you can find everywhere, but it tends to be pretty powerful.
Мне все
The scenario I really love is corporate discounts, or scenarios that imitate
перейдешь по ссылке, штраф, там уволят.
scenarios that rely on the fear factor, so to speak, like
Результативность
you gotta submit this data or you will be prosecuted.
не слать нашу нагрузку через через СЗИ, через корпоративную почту.
Some of the tricks I'm showing here, including vishing, for example, will help you bypass the existing defenses. You know, vishing is indeed a magical tool. If you call the person, if you call them and inform them that you're going to send them a letter and you need them to respond,
Но кто-то
well, you're not guaranteed that they will walk the whole kill chain A to Z, but it does increase efficiency by leaps and bounds.
не у всех, точнее в организации у пользователей нет свободного доступа в интернет.
If users don't have easy access to the internet, for example, they're only using a white-listed
Пробили, но нам не показалось
domains,
ресурс, там какая-то плохая видимость, что-то нам не подходит.
and if you don't like something about the resource, for example, if there are issues with visibility,
То можно использовать такой вектор. И последний вектор, который я смог
then
придумать,
you can use Vector 5, where you host your payload on white-listed
с
resources.
помощью сервиса, а условно
And finally, you can do spear phishing via service. So, for example, there is a corporate resource elsewhere, like a video conferencing system or some storage system, and we know there are lots and lots of users there.
необходимо обновиться, пока он не
So, we can tell them that you need to update, otherwise the system will not be operational. You won't be able to maintain access. And we also give them a link
дропаем ему.
to the update, or we send them a zip
В
file.
следующем заходе мы получаем пробив, мы
Once they get the update, we tell them, thank you very much, your system has been updated.
тоже доволен.
Everybody's happy,
Я собрал полезные
including the red team. I'm listing here some useful resources around social engineering. Marish Banak is the go-to place. By the way, Marish Banak will be speaking at a WarCon in about 10 days.
Я советую не пропускать. В Твиттере
So make sure you don't miss his presentation.
ЦВЕ в контексте
On Twitter, Will Dorman is the go-to place. So if a new CVE has been discovered on social engineering site, it's either he discovered it or he's, reading up on it right now.
Все, спасибо за
Which puts the lid on my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Добрый день, Константин, спасибо за доклад. Подскажите, пожалуйста,
Hi.
как вы оцениваете перспективы вишинг-атак с использованием систем
What do you think about the prospects of phishing attacks
и защиты?
using techniques for, spoofing
проходит
numbers, so to speak?
фишинговые атаки, они же проходят с подменой номера
Well, the
банка и так далее.
classic phishing attacks,
Я
they do rely now on spoofing, say, Sberbank or other bank numbers. Now, there was a case
такой,
when I called an employee
потому
and
подменить номер.
and he asked me, why are you calling me from this particular number? Well, that was because I wasn't using the right number.
Номером сотрудника
So, if you do spoof the mobile number,
вот такой, это ему дополнительная галочка, что легитимно, скорее всего.
you will significantly increase the probability that the call will be considered legit.
Спасибо большое, очень интересный доклад.
Thank you very much. Such an interesting presentation indeed.
Что ожидает нас в ближайшее время? Я видела, было написано 25-й год, год фишинга. Как ты считаешь?
So I understand that 2025 is the year of phishing, did you say? So do you expect new methods or new techniques to come to the fore before that time?
Огромный рост
Well, of the existing techniques, LNK is very much on the
о
rise.
них известно.
Well, and we've known about LNK for a long time, and Microsoft has not been very proactive
Конечно,
thwarting these attacks.
новые техники.
It's difficult to make any predictions. New techniques appear, some other techniques are getting sort of
Все возможно.
outdated. OneNote has been pretty much zeroized by now. It's difficult for me to predict the future. I'm not clairvoyant.
Интересные.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that 2 good questions will get you merchandise. Will get you, I'm sorry, some prizes.
Да, здравствуйте. Спасибо за доклад. Я
Fine. Thank you very much for your presentation.
вызов вопросов в развитии, так сказать. Есть ли перспективы для фишинговых атак
I am wondering about the prospects of phishing attacks.
в искусственном интеллекте, в том числе
In particular,
и
do you think that artificial intelligence can be leveraged in order to improve phishing and other social engineering?
И
Well, I've been playing a bit with ChatGPT, Actually, my boss has been asking me about the prospects of using GPT-like services.
Очень правильно, грамотно задать,
Well,
то если
if you do your prompt engineering
хотя бы идею
right,
от чего-то стартануть.
well, let me put it differently. If you do not know how to do the right, say, vishing scripts, ChatGPT can help you.
Если возникают и правильно ему задать критерии реализации, он поможет.
Well, you need to know how to do prompt engineering. That ChatGPT can help you.
Тут что-то устаревшее, это не работает, это. Ты можешь долбить.
So if some resources, for example, are outdated, it will help you. If you're stuck somewhere, you can ask ChatGPT for inspiration.
Социального инженера
I'm not saying it will solve social engineering issues for you, but it can be used. It is a pretty good tool, for sure.
Можете, пожалуйста, микрофон передать? Привет, спасибо за доклад. У меня такой вопрос. Ты совсем вскользь упомянул этап разведки, а именно
You have briefly mentioned
установленных СЗИ и какие там политики на
reconnaissance, checking what kind of defenses are installed and what kind of policies are in place or whether a net use is allowed. How do you usually do this kind of reconnaissance? What kind of tactics and techniques do you use?
специально, конечно, я не могу раскрывать.
Well,
все
obviously,
которые мы используем.
I've dropped this idea for a reason, but I cannot tell you
Заголовки письма
about what we do.
очень часто
What I can tell
в
you
заголовках, то есть не используется, например,
is that
там будет вырезать
service headers are something that we're looking at.
которые используются на почтовом шлюзе. Условно, вот достаточно часто встречается security email gateway решение от Касперского, не вырезать.
What we see quite often is security solutions from Kaspersky, and if they're not using postfix to remove those service headers, it's very easy for us to read.
Что он
It's easy for me to identify that they're using Sandbox and what kind of capabilities are running in the Sandbox.
может какие-то
Moreover,
управляемые сценарии, то есть мы изучаем
we will try to start by sending some scripts to check what kind of transport they're using, whether you're doing TCP or DNS, what's allowed on the host system,
которые у нас есть.
in order to learn if we will be able to launch, all the code we want to launch there. Because if we can't, we won't want to alert the SOC with our payloads.
Сегодня много поговорили
Two more
на
questions.
самом деле винду и ее инфру.
We have talked a lot about the infrastructure of Windows,
Это наше будущее.
but Linuxes and Macs are being used now to replace Windows systems a lot.
Вроде бы из всех перечисленных методов, плюс-минус они в 2021 году перестали работать. Там даже
And I understand that,
то есть
many tactics are no good anymore since 2021.
За два вопроса.
I'll take, for example, smuggling seems to be totally off by now.
Коллеги,
When we see more Linux systems, we'll be thinking about them, okay?
по-моему, делали доклад.
People doing malware analysis
Можно туда обратиться.
have done some analysis about Linux attacks. We haven't seen enough of those, really.
Есть предпосылки, мы знаем, где используются уже не
We do know
отвечая
that some customers are using more Linux systems now.
2018 года.
And as regards HTML smuggling technique, it does date back to 2018, but we are still seeing HTML smuggling used effectively in our projects and in the wild.
64
The technique itself is very well known, but it can be obfuscated in various ways. If you use pure play HTML smuggling, in all probability, it will be detected and thwarted. If you use it in obfuscation, it will be successful until we completely do away with JavaScript.
Константин, спасибо за доклад, очень интересно.
Thank you very much for your report, Konstantin. It's very interesting.
Нашли в прошлом году
I wonder if the leaks that happened last year
всеми нами, да, исходя из того, что они очень большой пласт уже переносной разведки дают. То есть оттуда мы очень
have been sort of underestimated
сотрудничаем.
by the community. We can actually learn so much from these data leaks about the employees and which services they're registered with. And some of these leaks actually contained their passport details. I'm wondering if you're using such leaked data, and there have been some high-profile leaks in Russia over the past year. Are you using them in your work? And my second question,
на цепочку
as
поставок,
red teams, have you been asked to do pen testing of supply chains
ну, настраивается
over email,
по почте, и
where, for example, you're not sending your payload,
злоумышленник начинает отвечать, перечислять
but, you know, first you get in touch, say, with the accountant of a supply chain company, and, you know, then you do some social engineering and send him your own bank account.
Что за чудо утечки?
Gamma Test, Yandex Eats or Yandex Еда,
Когда
I've been hit by both.
Scope, мы знаем адрес заказчика офиса.
Well, when we cannot learn enough scope-wise, we will turn to these data lakes. So Gamma Test, which is a medical test company, their data lake has been particularly juicy.
Что это утекло и используется
I
активно.
think everybody knows that, you know, this is a treasure trove. So this data is being used a lot by threat actors, and, you know, they continue parsing this data.
Не применялось, но это очень интересный вектор, потому что вот при том же
We have not used this data.
риску
I'm sorry, we haven't done what you asked about in your second question, but it is
на проектах по силу причин тому, что
an interesting vector for sure.
если когда-то придется выдумывать что-то,
I think we're not using it at the moment because there are other ways which are quite effective. But it is indeed a very, seemingly at least, a very efficient vector.
строится на том, что они ломают
In fact, so many APT attacks start
слайд, там, вложения или просить куда-то перейти.
with, you know, email communications and invitations to enter a particular group or attachments being sent over email.
Отличный доклад,
Hi.
мне очень понравилось.
Great presentation, loved it.
Очень интересный вопрос, и он требует контекста.
Now my question will require some context.
Проходил.
So several days ago,
Это
I went through a training delivered by Positive Technologies, and
автоматизированное средство, которое
the project there
письма для индивидуального
sort of revolved around automating phishing emails,
и DNS,
phishing email generation. Oh, I know whose project that is.
как сказать, актуальные входные данные для вас для создания фишинга. То есть, как вы получаете входные данные, которые, когда
How do you,
пишут?
like, when you generate phishing emails,
Фокус-группы.
how much do you care for the input data? Are you asking me about the focus group?
Понял.
Oh, how do you sort of personalize your phishing emails?
Я говорил про
There is no one size fits all here.
житейский сценарий. Используя такие сценарии, есть
So a regular corporate scenario, for example,
используют Vowling, когда
is such that we don't really need to personalize much. We don't go collecting personal information on social media. I personally feel bad about it.
зачем я это
You know, sometimes, you know, if I do that, I start asking myself, why the heck? Why am I doing this? And I have to sort of persuade myself that I'm doing this in order to harden the security of a good company. But I don't like doing this.
там паспортных данных, то в
So during the conscription or mobilization campaign in September and October last year,
человека
data lakes were
такой минимум
tapped, so to
того,
speak.
что делается.
Понял. И есть как-то, как за тобой следить в социальных сетях или...
Я не люблю
Can I follow you on social media? I don't like publicity. If you want, I can give you my Telegram contacts so you can get in touch with me there. Thank you.
Георгий, убери там все эти глушилки.
Спасибо за доклад. У нас тут возник
Thanks for your presentation. We have this question here.
ведутся ли
Do you have any stats
вишинг-атаки, если их проводят со стороны противоположного
about vishing? Like, is vishing more successful if it's the opposite gender? Like, if the IT guy gets a call from a lady, will he fall for it?
Звоню я.
I don't have the stats because I am the person doing the calling. And I've been told that, I'm sorry, I guess you must be right. I guess that IT guys will fall for a female voice. we should probably employ this technique as well.
Говорят,
Is that it, guys?
извините,
I'm told my time is over. I'm sorry about that.
про вопросы про мерч. Очень понравился вопрос. Ты не
All right.
не помню,
I loved the question.
вопроса было про утечки.
You didn't introduce yourself, but you had this question about leaks, and I loved it.
Вопросы вылетают из головы.
I'm sorry, I do forget some questions, so I hope you don't take it personally. But there was a question about HTML smuggling. All right, this person must have left already.
Что, как бы известно об этом давно. Скорее всего, это неэффективно. Нет.
So you said that HTML smuggling has been known for a long time. It must be not good anymore. That's not the case. It's growing. And these two people should get the prizes. Thank you very much. A pleasure to see you all.